Welcome. My name is Darius, and I want to share a true life story with you. When Dr. Marcus Oakley frowned during the exam and carefully asked who had treated her before him, Elaine simply replied that it was her husband. He was a gynecologist too, but the doctor went silent. He set his instruments aside and told her she needed immediate lab work because what I'm seeing inside shouldn't be there. His tone made her heart sink with dread. She didn't yet understand exactly what had so alarmed the experienced specialist. In that moment, her familiar world, where Sterling was not only a loving husband but a trustworthy doctor, cracked for the first time. Elena sat in the chair, trying not to think about how strange the doctor's question had sounded. Marcus Oakley seemed like a serious, thoughtful man, not someone who threw words around carelessly. His office was located in a new medical center on the outskirts of the city, and she had only decided to come because the pain had become unbearable. For the past 6 months, she had been suffering from sharp spasms in her lower abdomen that came in waves, forcing her to double over. Her cycle had completely broken down. The bleeding was painful and unpredictable. Every time, Sterling would reassure her, explaining that changes like this were natural at 42 years old, and that her body was just adjusting. But something inside her resisted his explanations. Her intuition told her that what was happening to her body was far from normal. When Sterling left to visit his ailing mother in Atlanta, she decided to make the secret visit to an outside physician. Dr. Oakley carefully studied her ultrasound results, shaking his head from time to time. His face remained professionally neutral, but Elaine noticed the muscles in his jaw tighten. The doctor changed the sensor angle several times, trying to get a clearer image. Finally, he put the device down and turned to her. There was something in his eyes that made her instinctively clench her fists. It wasn't just professional interest, it was closer to shock at what he'd seen. "You said your husband has been treating you for 5 years?" he asked, wiping his hands with antiseptic. "And what exactly has he been prescribing you this whole time?" Elena tried to remember. It was usually hormonal pain medication and occasionally anti-inflammatory suppositories. Sterling always insisted that he knew her body better than any outside doctor. Dr. Oakley walked over to the ultrasound monitor and pointed to an irregularly shaped dark spot in the uterine area. "See this growth?" he said, his voice strained. "It's a foreign body, and by all indications, it's been there for a very long time. It looks like an old-style intrauterine device, or IUD, that has become embedded in the tissue." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "An IUD?" she repeated, not believing her own ears. "I've never had an IUD. I would know if someone had placed something in me." The doctor took out the medical chart she'd brought with her and flipped through the pages. "There are no records here of an intrauterine contraceptive being inserted," he confirmed. "But things like this don't appear on their own. Someone must have put it in, and it didn't happen yesterday." Elaine tried to focus, to recall anything that could explain what was happening, but her memory offered nothing. She had always been afraid of IUDs, considering them invasive and dangerous. Sterling knew about her fears and had never suggested that method of contraception. "I need to run additional tests," Dr. Oakley said, standing up from his desk. "Inflammatory markers, tumor markers, the full spectrum. What I'm seeing on the ultrasound raises serious concerns. The tissues around the foreign body are altered. There are signs of chronic inflammation." He left the office, leaving her alone with terrifying thoughts. Elena tried to calm herself, searching for a rational explanation. Maybe the doctor was wrong. Maybe it was something else, not an IUD. A few minutes later, a nurse came into the room with a tray for drawing blood. The young woman worked silently, but Elaine noticed her exchange a look with the doctor when he returned. There was a silent dialogue between them, full of professional anxiety. "Doctor, the inflammatory markers are really through the roof," the nurse quietly said, showing him the results of a rapid test. Elaine heard those words and felt everything inside her clench with fear. Something was seriously wrong with her body, something she never suspected. Dr. Oakley sat across from her and folded his hands on the desk. "Elaine Thames," he said seriously, "I need to be absolutely honest with you. What is in your uterus poses a real threat to your health. It is not just a foreign body. It is a source of chronic inflammation that could have provoked severe tissue changes. He pulled out a referral form and began filling it out. You need immediate hospitalization at the County General Medical Center for the surgical removal of this object. The operation cannot be delayed. Every day you wait increases the risks. Elaine stared at him, unable to believe what was happening. Just this morning, she was a regular woman with chronic pain, and now she was being told about urgent surgery and serious risks. How could this happen? How could she not know what was going on inside her own body? And one more thing, the doctor added, handing her the referral. Given the circumstances under which this foreign body may have ended up in your system without your knowledge, I strongly recommend you contact law enforcement. What happened to you may qualify as a felony. Those words sounded like a death sentence. Elaine took the referral with trembling hands, still not fully grasping the magnitude of what she was facing. A crime. Who could have committed a crime against her? Who had access to her body when she was vulnerable? A single thought, terrifying and impossible, was already beginning to form in the depths of her mind. A thought she was reluctant to entertain, but which explained everything. The thought that the person she trusted most in the world might have betrayed that trust in the most monstrous way. Leaving the medical center, Elena felt the world she had lived in for the past 15 years collapsing. A world where Sterling was a loving husband and a caring doctor, where their marriage seemed solid and dependable. Now, that world was cracking, and she dreaded imagining what would be revealed when it finally crumbled. The operating room at the County General Medical Center was flooded with bright light. When the surgeon, Dr. Vernon Harmon, began to extract the foreign body from Elena's uterus, what he saw made him freeze for a moment with his instruments in hand. The IUD, blackened with time, was so tightly embedded in the tissue that its removal required extreme caution. The device's metallic arms were literally cutting into the uterine walls, leaving traces of necrosis and inflammation. "Good grief," he muttered, carefully examining the extracted object. "This is a Seraph IUD. They were banned for use over 10 years ago because of their high cancer risk." The assisting nurse handed him a sterile container, and the surgeon placed the IUD inside. Even beneath the layer of biological buildup, the distinctive shape of the device was visible, a device once hailed as a revolutionary contraceptive method. Dr. Harmon continued the operation, thoroughly cleaning the damaged tissues and stopping the bleeding. The inflammatory process had affected a significant area, and in some places the tissues looked suspicious. He took several samples for a pathology report, understanding that the results might be extremely unfavorable. 8 years of a cancer-causing device being in her body could not have passed without consequence. When the surgery was over, the surgeon personally escorted the patient to the intensive care unit. Elaine slowly came to after the anesthesia. Her mind gradually cleared. The first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was the concerned face of Dr. Harmon leaning over her bed. "The operation was a success," he said softly, but his tone held a warning. "We removed the foreign body. But what we found raises serious concerns." He showed her a clear container with the blackened IUD inside. "The device has a serial number, N3847. We'll definitely run it through the database to find out where it came from." Elena looked at the piece of metal that had been poisoning her body for 8 years and couldn't believe the reality of what was happening. The IUD looked sinister. Its surface was covered in a dark film, and the sharp edges had clearly traumatized the surrounding tissues. How could something like this have ended up inside her without her knowledge? How could she not have felt this foreign body? Dr. Harmon explained that old-style devices were often inserted without adequate pain relief, and patients might not remember the procedure, especially if it was performed under general anesthesia during another surgery. But the main concern was not the IUD's presence itself, but the consequences of its prolonged existence in her body. The Seraph IUD was taken off the market precisely because of its ability to cause malignant tumors. A few hours later, a woman in a severe suit entered the room and introduced herself as Detective Nia Blount. She took out a recorder and a notebook, settling into a chair beside the bed. Her appearance meant the case had gained official status, that what happened was being treated as a possible crime. "Aline Thames," the detective began, "I need to ask you a few questions about how this device might have ended up in your body. Did your husband have access to your medical chart? When was the last time you were under general anesthesia?" These questions struck her like hammer blows, each one bringing her closer to the terrible truth. Elaine tried to concentrate, recalling all the medical procedures of recent years. She had only been under general anesthesia once, 8 years ago, when she had her appendix removed. At the time, Sterling insisted that the surgery take place at his private practice, not the city hospital. "Why would you need outside doctors?" he'd asked. "I'll supervise everything myself. I'll be there every step of the way." The detective carefully recorded every word, clarifying details from time to time. Who else was in the operating room? How long did the surgery last? What was the post-operative period like? Elaine answered mechanically, but with every question a terrible suspicion grew in her soul. Sterling had indeed controlled everything. He had been there from start to finish. Detective Blount explained that inserting an IUD without a patient's consent qualifies as a serious crime against the person, especially considering the device used was known to be hazardous to health. The maximum penalty for such actions could be up to 10 years in federal prison. The next day, the hospital room phone rang. It was the medical records laboratory. The voice on the line sounded official and dry, but the information was like an electric shock. The IUD, with serial number N3847, was registered as having been disposed of on March 15th, 8 years ago, at the very women's health practice managed by Sterling Thames. Detective Blount, who was present during the conversation, immediately contacted her colleagues to obtain the disposal records. Elaine lay in bed, feeling the last hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding crumble. The facts stacked up into a horrifying portrait of betrayal by the man she had entrusted with her life. Dr. Harmon returned with the results of the urgent pathology report, and his face was grim. Tissue samples taken during the operation showed the presence of atypical cells, characteristic of a pre-cancerous condition. Stage 3 dysplasia required immediate additional treatment and permanent oncological monitoring. This is a direct consequence of the long-term exposure to the carcinogenic device, the surgeon explained. If the IUD had remained in your body for another year or two, we would be dealing with advanced cancer. You were incredibly lucky that you went to Dr. Oakley when you did. His words sounded like a death sentence, not only for her health, but for her marriage. Elaine asked for her phone to call Sterling and tell him what had happened, but when she dialed his number, an unfamiliar woman answered. "Hello, who is this?" a woman's voice asked with a slight irritation. "Sterling is busy right now. He's taking care of a sick patient." Elena silently hung up, realizing her husband's deceit stretched far wider than she could have imagined. Detective Blount received copies of the documents from Sterling's practice via fax. According to the medical device disposal log, IUD N3847 had been written off as defective and subject to destruction. The signature next to the entry belonged personally to the practice manager, but instead of being destroyed, the device had been used for the secret sterilization of his own wife. Detective Blount explained to Elena that they now had enough evidence to open a criminal case. Witness testimonies, medical records, expert analysis results, everything pointed to the deliberate actions of Sterling Thames. All that remained was to obtain his confession or find additional clues confirming the motive for the crime. Elena lay in the hospital room, staring at the ceiling and trying to grasp the scale of the betrayal. The man she had lived with for 15 years, whom she had entrusted with her body and soul, was capable of monstrous cruelty. He wasn't just lying to her. He was methodically destroying her health, depriving her of the ability to have children, and exposing her to the risk of cancer. But the most horrifying realization was that all this time, Sterling had been playing the role of a loving husband and doctor. He comforted her when she complained of pain, prescribed treatment that couldn't possibly help, knowing perfectly well the true cause of her suffering. Every consolation, every explanation about age-related changes was a cynical lie. Now she had to fight not only for her health, but also find the strength to confront the man who had been the center of her world for so long. Ahead lay the court, the investigation, the need to prove what seemed incredible, even to herself. But most importantly, she had to find the answer to the question that tormented her the most. Why did Sterling do this? What compelled him to commit such a crime against his loving wife? If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube knows you're interested in stories like this and recommends more quality narratives. Discharged from the hospital on the third day after surgery, Eileen headed straight to the women's health practice where Sterling worked. Detective Blount had given her special permission to examine her husband's office as part of the investigation. The security guard reluctantly let her in, constantly glancing at his phone as if debating whether to warn the manager about his wife's visit. Everything in Sterling's office was familiar down to the smallest detail. The massive oak desk, the leather chair, the framed diplomas on the walls, the photograph of their trip to Hawaii. But now, this familiar setting seemed like a backdrop concealing a monstrous secret. Elaine walked over to the safe, whose code she knew by heart. It was their wedding date. Inside the safe were documents Sterling considered especially important. Among them, she found a thick folder containing medical device logs from the past 10 years. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, looking for the entry from March 15th, 8 years ago. And there it was, the entry about the disposal of IUD N3847, next to which was Sterling's sprawling signature. The office door quietly opened, and a young woman in a white coat appeared in the doorway. Elaine recognized her. It was Oliva Reese, one of the clinic's nurses, always cheerful and efficient. But now, Oliva's face showed confusion and fear at the sight of the manager's wife holding the documents. "Elaine Thames," Oliva said uncertainly. "What are you doing here? Dr. Thames said you were in the hospital after surgery." The nurse was holding something that she tried to hide behind her back, but Elena managed to catch a glimpse of the distinctive packaging of a pregnancy test. "I've already been discharged," Elena replied, carefully studying the young woman's face. Oliva looked distressed. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes darted around. "What is that in your hand?" Elena asked, though she already guessed the answer. The nurse became even more flustered and pressed the test to her chest. "It's personal," Oliva mumbled, but her voice sounded unconvincing. Elena noticed a gold ring with a small diamond sparkling on the ring finger of her right hand. The ring was strikingly similar to her own wedding ring, which Sterling had given her 15 years ago. "That's a beautiful ring," Elena commented, pointing to the nurse's hand. "Where did you buy something like that?" Oliva instinctively hid her hand behind her back, but it was too late. "It was a gift from my sweetheart," she replied quietly, and a note of defiance entered her voice, as if she were protecting something very dear. Elaine felt everything inside her tighten with the premonition of new revelations. Did Sterling's betrayal stretch even further than she could have imagined? Did he have a mistress besides the secret sterilization, to whom he gave the exact same rings he gave his wife? Oliva tried to leave the office, but in the hallway, an older woman with a noticeably rounded belly called out to her. Elaine recognized her as Marina Vance, a longtime patient of the clinic who had been monitored there for years. The woman looked tired but happy, clearly expecting a child at a mature age. "Oliva, thank you so much," the pregnant woman said, hugging the nurse. "If it weren't for you, I don't know how we would have managed the housing for me and my kids. Dr. Thames is such a kind man. He helped with the apartment paperwork. My older ones are so happy they're going to have another little brother or sister." Elaine froze when she heard those words. It meant Sterling had children with other women, and he was helping them with housing. How many secrets was the man she considered her husband concealing? Oliva noticed Elena had overheard the conversation, and her face went white with fear. "Marina Vance, not here." the nurse whispered, trying to move the pregnant woman away from the manager's office. But it was too late. Elena had heard enough to understand the scale of the deception. Sterling had not only deprived her of the ability to have children, but he was also fathering them with other women. The patient left. Oliva remained standing in the hallway, unsure what to do. Elena walked out of the office with the logbook in her hands and approached the nurse. "How many children does he have?" she asked, looking directly into the young woman's eyes. Oliva tried to deny it, but her gaze gave everything away. "I don't know what you're talking about," she mumbled, but her voice trembled with distress. "Dr. Thames just helps patients. He's a good doctor." Elaine shook her head, realizing that the nurse was either deceived herself or was an accomplice in this complex game. At that moment, the security guard's phone rang. He had been watching them from his booth. Elaine heard snippets of the conversation, from which she understood someone was asking the man about what was happening at the practice. "Thames," the guard said into the phone, "your wife was here looking for something in your office. Oliva caught her, and they were talking about something." Elena realized she had little time left. Sterling would surely find out about her visit now and try to hide or destroy the incriminating documents. She quickly took pictures of the logbook page with the IUD disposal entry, as well as several other suspicious entries on her phone. Oliva stood nearby, clearly in a state of internal conflict. On one hand, she was loyal to Sterling. On the other, she saw his wife suffering and knew something was terribly wrong. The pregnancy test in her hand was eloquent proof that she was more than just a nurse to the practice manager. Elaine decided to take a gamble. "Is it his?" she asked, pointing to the test in Oliva's hand. The nurse didn't answer, but her silence was more telling than any words. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she pressed the test to her chest, as if shielding her future child from a cruel world. "He promised me he would divorce you," Oliva finally said, barely audible. "He told me you were sick, that you couldn't have children, that your marriage was long dead. I didn't know that he was the one who made you sick." These words served as a confession, confirming Elaine's worst fear. "How many children do you have together?" Elena asked, feeling her world spin with horror. Oliva looked up at her, her eyes full of tears and remorse. "2, she whispered. "Macy, she's 5, and Isaac, he's 3. They think Daddy works in another city, which is why he rarely comes home." Elena felt the ground disappear from under her feet. It turned out that while she was suffering from the pain caused by the embedded IUD, Sterling was creating a parallel family with a young nurse. He was raising the children he had deprived her of. He played the role of a loving father to some and an indifferent husband to another. The security guard finished his conversation and headed towards them, clearly having received instructions from Sterling. "Elena Thames," he said with forced politeness, "I need to ask you to leave the building. The manager said you do not have the right to be here without his presence." Elena knew her time was up. She quickly left the practice, taking with her the document photos and the terrible knowledge of her husband's double life. In the car, she called Detective Blount and told her what she had learned. Now they had not only proof of a crime against her health, but also a motive explaining Sterling's actions. Detective Blount listened carefully and promised to immediately question Oliva Reese as a witness. She also planned to obtain a warrant to search Sterling's home and workplace to seize all documents that might shed light on his criminal activity. Elaine drove home, realizing her life was utterly ruined. The man she trusted most in the world was capable of monstrous betrayal. He had not only deprived her of her health and the possibility of motherhood, but had also deceived her for years, building a family with another woman. Now she had to find the strength for a final confrontation with the man who had been the center of her world for so long. Ahead lay the court, the exposure, the need to prove what seemed unbelievable. But most importantly, she needed to learn to live again, free from illusions about the love and loyalty of the man who had betrayed her in the cruelest way. If you enjoy this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. The house greeted Elaine with its usual silence, but now that silence felt sinister, full of hidden secrets and lies. She walked into Sterling's home office, where his personal computer sat, a machine she'd never had reason to use before. She guessed the password on the third attempt. It was his mother's birthday, the person he considered most important in his life. The desktop was neatly organized. Folders contained medical documents, scientific articles, photos from conferences, but one folder with an unusual name stood out. Forever Now, which immediately caught her attention. Elena clicked on it, and her heart froze at what appeared on the screen. Inside the folder were hundreds of photos of Oliva in intimate poses, pictures of their trips together, romantic dinners, and outings with small children. In one photo, Sterling was holding a girl of about 5 who looked strikingly like him. Next to her stood a younger boy, also with his characteristic features. These were the Macy and Isaac that Oliva had mentioned. But the most terrifying discovery was the correspondence that spanned over 5 years. Elena opened the message file and started reading, feeling everything inside her constrict with horror with every line. The correspondence began with ordinary work questions, but gradually moved into personal confessions and plans for the future. In one message, dated 3 years prior, Sterling wrote to Oliva about his plans. "Don't worry, darling, I solved the problem with Elaine once and for all. I gave her a little gift during her appendectomy. She definitely won't be having kids now, and we can be together without any more questions about heirs." Elena reread the message several times, unable to believe her own eyes. It meant Sterling had coldly planned her sterilization, discussing it with his mistress as if it were a routine work task. He hadn't just yielded to a momentary impulse during surgery. He had prepared for this crime in advance. The correspondence became even more cynical. Sterling told Oliva how he comforted his wife when she complained of pain, how he prescribed useless treatment, knowing the true cause of her suffering. He even joked about it, calling himself a brilliant doctor who had solved 2 problems at once, getting rid of the need to have children with his wife and gaining the opportunity to start a new family. In another folder, Elaine found scanned copies of bank documents that completely shattered her image of her husband. Monthly transfers to Oliva Reese for $5,000, labeled alimony for Macy and Isaac. It turned out Sterling was officially supporting 2 children by his mistress while convincing his wife that their family budget wouldn't allow them to have children of their own. There were also documents for the purchase of an apartment in Oliva's name, insurance policies for the children, and plans for their education. Sterling had created a full-fledged parallel family into which he poured not only money, but also emotion. In the correspondence, he called Macy his princess and Isaac his heir. Meanwhile, he viewed his wife as a burden to be discarded in the least painful way possible. It was especially painful to read the messages from the past few months, where Sterling discussed divorce plans with Oliva. He wrote that he would wait until Elaine developed cancer from the embedded IUD. Then he could divorce her under the pretense of not being able to handle the psychological stress of his wife's illness. Public opinion would be on his side, and the assets would remain his. Elaine saved all the discovered files onto a flash drive, understanding that these were the key pieces of evidence of her husband's crime. But emotionally, she was completely shattered, realizing the extent of the betrayal. The man she had lived with for 15 years had not just deceived her, he had methodically destroyed her life, planning every step of that destruction. The phone rang. Detective Blount's name lit up the screen. "Aline Thames," the familiar voice said. "I have news for you, and it's not great. We received the results of the additional tissue analysis taken during the surgery. You have precancerous changes of the 3rd degree. This is a direct consequence of the long-term presence of the carcinogenic IUD in your system." Elaine listened to the detective's explanation, feeling numb with horror. It meant Sterling hadn't just deprived her of the ability to have children. He had effectively sentenced her to a painful death from cancer. If she hadn't gone to Dr. Oakley, she would have had advanced cancer in a year or 2, with minimal chances of recovery. Detective Blount continued to explain the legal aspects of the case. Sterling now faced charges not only of causing grievous bodily harm, but also attempted murder. The maximum sentence for the combined charges could be up to 15 years in prison. The detective also informed her that she had obtained a warrant to search the house and seize all documents related to the case. Elena told her about the discovered correspondence and bank documents that confirmed the motive for the crime. Detective Blount listened carefully and asked her not to touch the computer until the experts arrived, so as not to compromise the integrity of the digital evidence. The search was scheduled for the next morning, but the detective warned that Sterling might try to return home and destroy the evidence. Just as Elaine finished her conversation with Detective Blount, she heard the front door open in the hallway. Her heart stopped with fear. She hadn't expected Sterling to return so early. "Honey," his voice called out from the hallway, "I'm back early. I have a surprise for you." His tone sounded as usual, affectionate and caring, but now that affection felt like a repulsive mask. Elena quickly closed all the files on the computer, but left the screen with the correspondence open. Let him see that his secret was exposed. Let him understand that the game was over. She took the container with the extracted IUD from her purse, which Dr. Harmon had given her as physical evidence. Sterling's steps approached the office, and Elaine braced herself for the hardest conversation of her life. She was about to look into the eyes of the man who had methodically been killing her for 8 years while playing the role of a loving husband and a caring doctor. She had to find the strength to stand against his lies and manipulations. The office door opened, and Sterling appeared in the doorway with a bouquet of red roses in his hands. He looked rested and happy, clearly anticipating a reunion with his wife after a week apart. But his expression instantly changed when he saw Elaine at his computer with the correspondence open on the screen. "Elaine," he said uncertainly, "what are you doing here? Why are you going through my computer?" His voice trembled, and his eyes darted between the screen and his wife's face, trying to assess the scale of the disaster. The roses dropped from his hands and scattered across the floor, symbolically ending their family idyll. Elaine silently turned the monitor toward him so he could read his own words about giving her a little gift during the surgery. Sterling went pale, realizing his most terrible secrets were exposed. Fear flashed in his eyes, then anger, then fear again. He knew his career, reputation, and freedom were hanging by a thread. "It's not what you think," he began, trying to find an explanation for the inexplicable. "I can explain everything. It was a medical necessity. You don't understand all the circumstances." But his voice sounded unconvincing even to himself. His words were confused, and his hands trembled with nervous strain. Elaine stood up from the desk and walked toward him, holding the container with the blackened IUD. "Here's your little gift," she said quietly, but her voice was steel. "For 8 years, you poisoned me from the inside with this garbage, deprived me of the ability to have children, drove me to a precancerous condition. And all this time, you played the role of a loving husband." Sterling tried to snatch the container from her hands, but Elena backed away. His mask finally slipped, and she saw the true face of the man she had lived with for half her life. It was the face of a predator cornered, ready to do anything to save his own skin, a man for whom she had never been anything more than an obstacle to happiness with another woman. Sterling stood in the office doorway. His face rapidly changed expression from surprise to comprehension, from fear to despair. The roses lay on the floor, their red petals scattered across the carpet, creating a sinister picture of a ruined idyll. He saw his correspondence with Oliva on the computer screen, understood that his most terrible secrets were exposed, but still tried to find a way to wriggle out of the situation. "Elaine, what are you doing here?" he repeated, taking a step into the room. "Why are you digging through my personal files? This is a violation of privacy. You have no right." His voice trembled with nervous strain, and his hands clenched into fists. He was still trying to play the role of the offended husband whose privacy had been violated. Elaine slowly turned to him, holding the container with the blackened IUD in her hands. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with the cold fire of righteous anger. "Is this your surprise?" she asked quietly, holding up the container. "For 8 years you poisoned me from the inside with this garbage, deprived me of the ability to have children, drove me to a pre-cancerous condition." Sterling lunged at her, trying to snatch the evidence from her hands. "Give that to me!" he yelled, losing the last shreds of his self-control. "You don't understand what you're doing. This could ruin my career, my reputation." Elena dodged him, pressing the container to her chest. For the first time in all their years of marriage, she saw her husband's true face, without masks or pretense. At that moment, footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Detective Blount's voice cut through the tense silence. "Sterling Nicholas Thames," she said in an official tone, walking into the office, accompanied by 2 police officers. "You are under arrest on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." Sterling turned to the newcomers. His face was contorted with horror. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, trying to maintain his dignity. "I am a respected doctor, a practice manager. I have an impeccable reputation. You can't arrest me based on the delusional accusations of my mentally unstable wife." Detective Blount pulled out handcuffs. Her face remained professionally impassive. "We have all the necessary evidence, including medical examination results, IUD disposal documents, and witness testimony. Your wife has provided us with correspondence in which you yourself confessed to the crime committed." Just then, Oliva burst into the house. Her face was streaming with tears, and she was clutching her cell phone. "Sterling!" she cried. "The guard at the clinic called me and said the police arrived. What's going on?" Seeing the handcuffs in the detective's hands, she rushed to her lover, trying to shield him. "I'll tell you everything," Oliva sobbed, turning to Detective Blount. "It was his idea, not mine. He told me his wife was infertile from birth, that they hadn't lived as husband and wife for ages. I didn't know that he made her sick himself." Her confession poured out, destroying Sterling's last hopes of salvation. Sterling pushed Oliva away and turned to Elena. A final attempt to justify his actions flashed in his eyes. "I did this for us," he said desperately. "You yourself said you weren't ready for children, that you wanted to build your career first. I just helped you avoid an unwanted pregnancy." Elaine looked at him with disgust, unable to believe this man was still trying to shift the blame onto her. "I wanted to wait a year, not become permanently infertile," she replied coldly. "You deprived me of the right to choose, sentenced me to suffering and illness, and all for her, for your children with your mistress." Detective Blount put the handcuffs on Sterling, ignoring his protests and attempts to resist. "Oliva Reese," she addressed the weeping woman, "you need to come with us to give your statement. You are a key witness in this case." The nurse nodded, understanding that her life too had fundamentally changed. Sterling was led toward the exit, but he kept turning back to Elaine, trying to find a flicker of their former love in her eyes. "Elaine," he pleaded, "we can fix everything. I'll find the best doctors. We'll cure you. Don't ruin our family over one mistake." His words sounded pathetic and unconvincing even to himself. Elaine watched silently as the man she had lived with for 15 years was led away. She felt no emotion other than emptiness and relief. That man had died to her the moment she read his correspondence with his mistress. What was being led away now was only a shell, inside which lurked a stranger and an enemy. Oliva lingered in the doorway. Her gaze wavered between Elena and the departing Sterling. "I truly didn't know," she whispered. "He said you were sick from birth, that doctors had forbidden you to get pregnant. I thought I was helping him find happiness with a woman who could bear him children." Elena looked at her with pity, realizing that Oliva, too, was a victim of Sterling's manipulation. "How old are you?" she asked quietly. 26, the nurse replied. Elena shook her head, realizing Sterling had seduced a very young woman when she was barely 20. "He used you too," Elena said. "He promised to divorce me, marry you, but in reality, he just wanted a young mistress and children on the side. If it weren't for this whole situation, he never would have left me, because I provided him with stability and respectability." Oliva cried even harder, realizing the truth of Elaine's words. "What will happen to my children now?" she sobbed. "How will I explain to them that their daddy is a criminal? How will I support them without his help?" Elena felt sympathy for her, despite everything that had happened. Detective Blount returned for Oliva, patiently waiting for her to finish talking with Elena. "We really need to go," the detective said gently. "The sooner we process all the statements, the sooner you can get back to your children." Oliva nodded and headed toward the exit, but turned back at the door. "Forgive me," she told Elena. "I know my apologies won't change anything, but I truly didn't want to cause you harm." Elena nodded silently, unable to find the words to reply. Forgiveness would come later, when the pain of betrayal subsided, when she could think about this story without shuddering. The house emptied, and Elaine was left alone among the scattered roses and the fragments of her former life. She picked up a few petals, remembering how she used to be thrilled by such surprises from her husband. Now those flowers felt like a mockery, Sterling's last attempt to preserve the illusion of a normal relationship. She walked into the bedroom and began gathering his things, realizing she no longer wanted to see anything in the house that reminded her of him. Every photograph, every book, every item of clothing was saturated with lies and deception. She had to start life anew, cleansing her space of the ghosts of the past. The phone rang. Dr. Oakley's name appeared on the screen. "Elaine Thames," he said warmly. "I heard what happened. How are you feeling? Do you need any medical assistance?" His concern was genuine, with no hidden motives. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a warmth spread inside her in response to the human compassion. "Physically, I'm okay. Emotionally, I suppose that will come with time." Doctor Oakley offered her psychological support and regular checkups to monitor her health after the IUD removal. Hanging up, Elaine went out onto the balcony and looked at the city spread out below. Somewhere in a detention center sat the man who had been slowly killing her for 8 years. Tomorrow, the trial would begin, with interrogations, expert analyses, and public discussion of the most intimate details of her life. But she was ready to go through it to achieve justice and to warn other women against a similar fate. I recommend listening to these 2 stories you see on the screen. I'm sure you'll like them. And in the comments for this video, you'll find a link to a collection of the best stories from around the internet. Thank you for watching. The county courthouse was filled with reporters, Sterling's colleagues from the medical community, and merely curious people drawn by the high-profile case of a doctor who had mutilated his own wife. Elena sat in the front row, trying not to pay attention to the whispers and curious stares. In the months since the investigation, she had learned to tune out public attention, focusing on the main goal, achieving justice. Sterling, in the defendant's dock, looked drawn and aged. His once polished appearance had been replaced by a sickly pallor and nervous tics. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but Sterling stared into the void, as if he still couldn't believe what was happening. His reputation was ruined, his career was over, and ahead loomed the prospect of many years behind bars. Judge Ava Jenkins, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, opened the session and gave the floor to the state prosecutor. The prosecutor methodically laid out the circumstances of the case. Each fact sounded like a hammer blow to the defendant's reputation. The secret insertion of a carcinogenic IUD, years of deception, the parallel family, the cynical correspondence with his mistress. The first witness called was Oliva Reese, who entered the hall pale and trembling. Her pregnancy was clearly visible. Her rounded belly added drama to her testimony. She sat in the witness chair, not daring to look at Sterling, who stared at her with pleading eyes. "Please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant," the prosecutor requested. Oliva spoke softly, but her words were distinctly heard in the ensuing silence. "He told me his wife was infertile from birth, that doctors had forbidden her to get pregnant due to genetic abnormalities. I believed him. I thought I was helping a good man find happiness." She recounted how Sterling promised her a divorce from his wife and an official marriage, how he planned their future together with their children. "He said he deliberately made his wife sick so she wouldn't claim the assets in the divorce," Oliva confessed, and a murmur of outrage passed through the hall. He said it would be better for everyone, that she wouldn't suffer through a divorce. Sterling's lawyer attempted to discredit Oliva's testimony, hinting at her vested interest in the outcome of the case. But the young woman steadfastly answered all the questions, providing specific dates and quoting messages from the correspondence. Her sincerity was evident even to the most skeptical jurors. The next witness was Dr. Oakley, who spoke of his suspicions from Elena's very first examination. The experienced physician couldn't help but notice that the patient's symptoms did not match the diagnoses her husband had given her. The inflammatory process was too localized, and the pain too specific for ordinary age-related changes. Surgeon Dr. Harmon demonstrated the extracted IUD to the court, explaining why devices like the Seraph had been banned from use. The carcinogenic properties of the alloy had been proven by numerous studies. This was why all such products were subject to mandatory disposal. Inserting such an IUD was tantamount to slowly poisoning the patient. A forensic expert read out the results of the analysis of Sterling's computer, confirming the authenticity of the correspondence with Oliva. The digital trail left no doubt that the messages were not fabricated. Especially compelling were Sterling's own confessions about how he solved the problem with his wife during the appendectomy. The medical expert announced the conclusion on the victim's health. The defendant's actions led to Elaine Thames's irreversible infertility and the development of a precancerous condition which, without timely intervention, would have progressed to stage 2 cancer. 8 years of a carcinogenic device being in her body caused irreparable harm to her reproductive system. When Elaine herself was given the floor, she stood up and slowly approached the podium. The courtroom fell silent. Everyone awaited her testimony. She was silent for a long time, collecting her thoughts, and then began to speak in a calm, even voice. "I entrusted this man with my health, my life, my love. For 15 years, I considered him the closest person on earth." Her voice didn't tremble, but every word was filled with pain and disappointment. "He used my love and trust. He used his professional knowledge as a weapon against me. For 8 years, I suffered in pain, not knowing the cause, and he comforted me, knowing that he himself was the source of my suffering." Elaine told the court how she had planned motherhood, how she dreamed of children, how she blamed herself for her infertility. "Now I know I will never be a mother," she said, and for the first time her voice cracked. "He deprived me of that right. He made the decision for me, disposed of my body as if it were his own property." She spoke about the years of deception, her husband's double life, and the children he was raising with another woman while his wife suffered the consequences of his crime. "The most terrible thing is not the physical pain, but the realization that the person you trust the most is capable of such cruelty." When Elaine finished her speech, there was absolute silence in the courtroom. Many women in the audience were crying, imagining themselves in her place. Even some of the jurors couldn't hold back their emotions, listening to the story of years of suffering and betrayal. Sterling's lawyer tried to present his client's actions as a medical mistake, the result of stress and professional burnout. But his arguments sounded unconvincing against the backdrop of clear evidence of deliberate intent. The correspondence with his mistress left no doubt that his wife's sterilization had been meticulously planned. Sterling himself refused to testify, limiting himself to a formal acknowledgement of the factual circumstances of the case. He sat with his head down, not daring to look his former wife in the eye. His silence was more telling than any excuse. The judge retired for deliberation, which lasted several hours. When the session resumed, Judge Jenkins read the verdict in a strict, official tone. "Sterling Nicholas Thames is found guilty of causing grievous bodily harm, committed with particular cruelty, and is sentenced to 7 years of incarceration in a maximum security prison. Additionally, the court permanently revoked Mr. Thames's medical license and ordered him to pay Elaine Thames a $500,000 compensation for moral damages. He must also reimburse all costs for the victim's treatment and rehabilitation." Sterling was led away in handcuffs. He never looked up at Elaine. His lawyer announced his intention to file an appeal, but everyone understood that with such evidence, the chances of leniency were practically nil. The medical community had already disavowed their former colleague. His name had become synonymous with professional betrayal. 1 year later, Elena stood before a mirror in an ivory-colored wedding dress that highlighted her slender but stronger figure. Regular checkups showed that the precancerous changes had been arrested. Her body was gradually recovering after the removal of the source of poisoning. Next to her stood Dr. Marcus Oakley, who over the past year had become not just a doctor, but a close friend. "Your lab work is completely normal," he said, adjusting her veil. "The risk of cancer has retreated, and the inflammatory processes have ceased. Your body shows an amazing capacity for recovery." Elena smiled, feeling the warmth of hope and new love spread inside her. A small girl of about 5 appeared in the doorway, in a white dress, holding a basket of rose petals. "Mommy, you look so pretty," said Aaliyah, whom Elena had adopted 6 months earlier. The girl had lost her parents in a car crash and had lived in a children's home for a long time until fate brought her to a woman who also knew loss and pain. Elena crouched down and hugged her daughter, feeling her heart fill with love for this little person. Motherhood had come to her not as she had dreamed, but it was no less real and profound. Aaliyah had called her mommy from day one, as if they had always been a family. Marcus, as she now called her future husband, offered her his arm. "It's time," he said softly. "The guests are waiting, and the minister doesn't like tardiness." Elena took his arm, feeling confidence and peace. Ahead lay a new life, built on honesty, trust, and real love. Leaving the house, she turned and looked at the windows of the apartment where years of deception and suffering had passed. Now, it was just a building, stripped of its power over her emotions. The past was behind her, and the future promised to be bright and full of meaning. And that, friends, is my story. A journey that started in the deepest, darkest shock and ended right here, in this beautiful new beginning. When I look back at those years, at the pain, the gaslighting, and the monstrous deception, it's hard not to feel that deep ache. But you know what? That pain was the fire that forced me to finally listen to that quiet voice inside, the one that told me, "Something is wrong, Elaine. Get out." If there's one thing I want you to take away from my journey, it's this. The greatest act of love is the fierce protection of your own truth. Never silence that gut feeling, that little flicker of doubt. That intuition? It's your internal compass, more reliable than any oath or wedding ring. Sterling tried to extinguish my light, my ability to choose, my health, and my chance at motherhood. But what he didn't realize is that ruin can be the soil where something real, something truly good, finally gets to grow. I lost a husband, a home, and the life I thought I had, but I found myself, I found justice, I found Marcus, and I found Aaliyah. My family wasn't destroyed. It was simply waiting to be built correctly, on a foundation of honesty and genuine care. And for that, I am eternally grateful for the second chance I fought for. Life can be brutal, but it is also brilliantly, gloriously kind when you stand up for yourself. Hold on to hope, because even after the deepest betrayal, the sun absolutely rises again. If you feel the same way I do, and you enjoyed my story, show it by giving this video a like. Let's see our numbers. I'm curious, what city are you listening to me from, and at what time? Write it down in the comments. If you'd like to support me on my journey, you can send me a small donation. Thank you for listening and for sharing your precious time with me. For more life stories like this, check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe. There are 2 new life stories on the screen that I'm sure will interest you. Click one to start listening right away. With love.